Welcome, everyone. I'm Lisa Miller. I'm the director of the journalism program. It's great to see you all here. I'm very excited to introduce Marcus Weisberger, class of '04. I asked Marcus earlier what he remembered most about his time at UNH, and I told him he didn't have to say his journalism classes. And he said working at the New Hampshire. So you New Hampshireites, here you go. There you go. Marcus is the global business reporter for Atlanta Media's Defense One, and he writes about the intersection of business and national security. He's covered the Pentagon for the past decade. He's reported from Afghanistan, the Middle East, Europe, and Asia, and he often travels with the Defense Secretary and other senior U.S. military officials. He writes about global military operations, arms sales, and policy. He's the vice president of the Pentagon Press Association. He's appeared on CNN, Fox News Channel, MSNBC, NPR, BBC World Service, and other nationally syndicated television and radio programs. Before joining Defense One, Marcus was senior Pentagon correspondent for Defense News and chief editor of Inside the Air Force. And years ago, while at Foster's Daily Democrat, Marcus embedded with the New Hampshire National Guard covering the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina from New Orleans. His work has been published in Newsday, Yahoo Sports, Air Force Magazine, and Flight International. And he lives in Washington, where, as he did when he was here, he plays hockey. So, please welcome Mark.
Thank you, Lisa. Guys, I'm not going to use a microphone. Everyone can hear me okay? Great. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Meg. Thank you, everyone from the journalism department for having me. This has just been a great opportunity to come back to UNH. I haven't been back here pretty much in 10 years, aside from a drive-by if I was up for a wedding or something. So it's really been a wonderful experience and great to see how this whole campus has transformed over the years. I'd like to thank another special friend who's in the back, Adam Krause, who wrote for Foster's Daily Democrat, who I believe is one of the best political reporters in the state of New Hampshire, who's back there. We worked together 12 years ago, and he's a dear friend, and I thank him for coming here today. So, and I also want to thank all of you journalism students who are here, and everybody who's not a journalism student who's just interested in journalism and interested in this really important subject that I believe not enough people pay attention to, and that's the military and the fact that our country has been at war for 15 years and no one seems to really want to talk about it much anymore. We're going to talk about some serious stuff tonight, but we're also going to talk about some of the fun stuff that journalism can provide you and places you can go if you stick with it. So first, I want to talk about Donald Murray, who this program, please don't read this because it is terrible. It is the first story I ever wrote for the New Hampshire, and it's about Donald Murray, who is an award-winning journalist who founded the UNH journalism program, who wrote for the Boston Globe right up until when he died a few years back. And I went to a session that he gave on writing, and he was a big writing coach and advisor, I believe, to journalists right up until the point also when he died. And I read this, and I remembered so much of the stuff he said in it, because the stuff he said is really great. Just the way I wrote it is just terrible. It's like the tailored way not to write a lead. But it's terrible. It's all people don't. Okay, we're going to get this off the screen really fast. But to paraphrase something he said, he basically said, write every day because it will make you better. And I was telling a class that earlier today. And the other thing is because it is fun. And I am somebody who really believes that writing and journalism is a lot of fun. And I'm real passionate about it, as you'll see over the course of the night. So we're going to talk about ISIS and the brutal militant group and how they've changed the way that journalists are covering war, and changing the way we have to write about even and fight for access to the military and just to get into places where we can't go anymore. As I mentioned earlier, and I want everyone just to keep this in mind again through the course of the night, that we have been at war for 15 years. So I just wanted to throw a non-serious slide up for a second. That's me in the New Hampshire office back in, I don't even know when. I think it's before I was managing editor, so probably like 2002, 2003. I don't remember why I was in the garbage can, but I think I jumped out and surprised one of my colleagues. I came to UNH wanting to be an engineer, and I am thrilled that I could not cut it in engineering classes. I still have a great appreciation for engineering. It just didn't work out for me. Luckily for me, the classes weren't going so great, and I went and I took a writing class with a guy named John Lofty, who I found out is not here anymore. And something happened that semester while we were taking classes. About a week in, September 11th happened, and it's something that we talked about in classes for pretty much the remainder of my time at UNH, but we really focused on it a lot in classes that semester, and we got to write about it as well. So one of our assignments was to write a news story, and I had lots of family and friends who were impacted in New York by the World Trade Center collapse. I'm from Long Island, so lots of my friends lost family members, siblings on that day. And I had a family member, I had a cousin, and I had a friend of mine's father who were in the World Trade Center or right near it, and got out and carried people away and really did some remarkable stuff that day. And we were never kind of allowed to talk about it. I remember going home for Christmas and Thanksgiving and being like, or Thanksgiving I should say, and being like, hey, why can't we talk about the fact that, Cousin Maria survived, got out of the World Trade Center and stuff, and everyone just wanted not to talk about it. I said, well, I have to write a news story, and I'm going to call her up and ask her about it and see if she'd be willing to talk to me. And sure enough, her and a friend of mine's father were all willing to talk to me, and they actually was really instrumental in their kind of recovery from the moment to be able to talk about it. So I wrote the story. I ended up taking Jane Harrigan, who is not here tonight, who was a wonderful professor who I had when she was here for actually every single journalism class I took. And I was enrolled in her news writing class and kind of got the bug and got hooked. So I've worked at a bunch of different places since I've graduated. I thought I was going to go back to New York, and I thought I was going to go write. I had interned at Newsday, which is a big newspaper on Long Island. I had interned there. I'd gotten a part-time gig there when I graduated school, and I said, all right, here we go. I'm all set. And it turns out the newspaper business as it is, it's a pretty rocky business, kind of turbulent at times, and my part-time job never turned into a full-time job. And went and I got a job at Foster's Daily Democrat back up here in New Hampshire. So much to my parents' chagrin, I came back up. I had offers to stay out of journalism and to go do other types of jobs. I wanted to give journalism a chance because I really believe in it and am passionate about it. So I came up and I worked for them. I covered fires in the middle of the night and cops and courts, and really the first bit of military reporting I ever did was, as Lisa mentioned, I embedded with the New Hampshire National Guard right after Hurricane Katrina. And I had never been around the military and never had experienced anything like that before. And it was really an eye-opening experience and kind of gave me the bug to go to get a job in Washington, D.C. and write about it. So I ended up getting a job in Washington. I wrote for a trade magazine called Inside the Air Force, part of an outfit called Inside Defense for 5 years, and then worked for a place called Defense News, which was owned by Gannett, which is USA Today. So then just recently, in the last year and a half, I decided to leave print journalism and go to an online-only publication called Defense One. So what is Defense One? We're part of Atlantic Media, which publishes The Atlantic and other titles such as National Journal and a website called Quartz, Government Executive magazine. They created Defense One to kind of write about the future of defense and kind of write analytical pieces to kind of get away from the day-to-day journalism that's becoming a lot of aggregation and just rewriting and just getting content up on your website regardless of whether it's valuable or not, just to get clicks and drive advertising. revenue. So I am the global business reporter. And what does that mean? I cover the defense industry, I cover the money at the Pentagon, I cover the arms that they're buying, I cover globally the arms trade, and I also cover a lot of policy now more broadly at the Pentagon, so kind of more of your traditional Pentagon type correspondent as well. Let's see, I said that already. So since I arrived in Washington, we've been, like I said, we've been at war for 15 years. I've been covering war. I only know how to write about the military when they're at war and kind of the policies that have evolved from being at war over the last 10 years. So it's done a lot to educate myself into what it was like pre this. I write a lot about the waste, fraud, and abuse, and projects that are just wildly over budget, that have very, very, very little oversight when you have a blank checkbook and trillions of dollars literally at your disposal. But the current war that we're fighting right now, that the U.S. and 66 other countries are fighting against ISIS, is much different than what the last 10 years or 15 years has been in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. To try to make it as simple as possible for you guys, you have ISIS, who wants to just create this caliphate, so basically their own area in Iraq and Syria. And the Iraq and Syrian governments want them out. But you also have Syria, where there's a civil war going on, tons of different other types of rebel groups, Khorasan group, and al-Nusra, and al-Qaeda affiliates. And then you have other rebel groups who are anti the government in Syria. And then you have the Kurds in Iraq, and different Kurds in Syria, and Turkey doesn't like them, but Turkey's a NATO ally, and the U.S. And others have to support them because they're a NATO ally. And then you get Russia that now decides it wants to come in and just bomb whoever it feels like bombing. So as you can see, it is really, 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 really complicated, and it's nearly impossible for journalists to get into Syria, and if you do go in there, there's a very high probability that something bad will happen to you. So you have ISIS, who does not want to tell their story to journalists. They won't give safe haven to journalists. They use social media to get their message out, and so they don't see a need for journalists to tell their stories to. And as you see from this was the U.S. Central Command website, which ISIS, or a sympathizer of ISIS, hacked one day and broke into it because they didn't have good security on it, and they were able to somehow get their password, and they just were able to do that, and a big black eye. So, and then the biggest thing is they killed journalists. So you have James Foley and you have Steven Sotloff, two journalists who were gruesomely beheaded by ISIS. These guys, pros, they had embedded in war zones before, and they still got killed. As one of my colleagues who has done numerous embeds, she is phenomenal. She's Egyptian, and she covers the Pentagon and is feisty and holds people accountable, and is just somebody I really look up to. She told me that if you screwed up in Iraq or Afghanistan, you could usually get out of it. You could pay your way out of it or something. If you screw up in Iraq, if you screw up in Syria, you're just dead. So who loses the most here? The people lose. This is Raqqa. It's what ISIS considers its capital. People live here, and it's just amazing. CNN actually had a report, I believe yesterday morning. I was watching it before I came over here. And they had a reporter get in there, and I'm amazed, and I'd love to find out more of the backstory on how they were able to get in there, but they were able to go and tell some of the stories, but not a lot was done on camera. As I said, it's next to impossible to get in there, and if you want to get in there, you can get to Damascus, but then you have to go through the Assad government, who, by the way, uses chemical weapons against their own people. So, say you're a hard-nosed journalist. You want to go in and you want to take your chances, and you still have those hurdles you're going to face. As I just mentioned, if you want to go to Syria, you have to go through the Assad government. But then you also have to wonder who you're going to work for, because a lot of organizations now aren't allowing, they're not taking stories from freelancers, so non-paid members of their staff. Say, I want to go there and I want my company to send me there. Guess what? They won't. They don't want the risk and the liability of sending somebody like me there. If I go, I'll talk a little bit later, but if I travel, say, with a senior official and go to a hot spot and just in and out, there's all sorts of protocol we have to go through with insurance and, for liability purposes. In the good old days, you can just show up to a conflict zone. You could, find you could find a translator, a local student or someone. You pay them, and you go off and you do your reporting. And sure, there are dangers, but it's nothing like it is right now there. So why don't you just go and embed, kind of like reporters did over the last decade, much of which happened during the Iraq War. That's kind of when technology got to the point where you were able to get video feedback live. And if you may recall videos of journalists on armored vehicles and stuff cruising through the desert as the military went toward Baghdad. Well, the U.S. military and any of the partner militaries won't let us embed anymore. I was at the Pentagon last week with a general in the Army who is a very pro-media type guy, and he really believes that the media should be covering this, and he sympathizes with journalists, but his direct quote was, "The age of the embed is over." And the embed program for the military was a big win. It really gave a chance for the first time for the military to have journalists tell the stories of soldiers who were fighting. If you were a journalist, you basically you had to agree in writing not to disclose classified information. So you basically couldn't report on where you were and where you were going. But you pretty much were able to do other reporting while you were in areas. If you went into a city or town or stuff, that no one was going to stop you from just talking to somebody. If you did disclose the information, you would usually get kicked out. And you may remember Geraldo Rivera was working for Fox, and he was drawing lines in the sand about positioning and stuff, and he got booted out. So as was mentioned earlier, I went and I embedded with the New Hampshire Guard during Hurricane Katrina. I rode around with these guys for a week, and they helped people back into their homes that were waterlogged and just filthy and disgusting and smelly. And it was a really powerful moment to be able to see this natural disaster right after it happened, kind of up close and personal. And it's when I got the bug to kind of go cover the military. So I mentioned the military is not letting us embed anymore. They'll let us go some places, but unfortunately they're with them, but unfortunately they're usually the places where you don't really want to go. They'll let you go see training, and they're actually trying to be a little bit more proactive in Ukraine right now, where the U.S. is training the Ukrainians who are fighting the Russian separatists in the eastern part of the country. And they've granted that. But Ukraine, again, is one of those places where, as a journalist, it's easier. You can call the Ukrainian government and basically go in and give you a media visa because they want people writing about what's happening there. So right now, there's two big reasons the Pentagon is not allowing us to go with them. First, unlike Iraq and Afghanistan, the first go-rounds where the U.S. went in and kind of took over their governments, now those countries have functioning governments. And they look at themselves as being guests of those countries. So they're the guests. They can't bring a +1 with them to the country. And that also means, as they say, they don't set the rules. Then second, because many of the combat missions that are going on are being done by special operations people, they really don't like journalists. They operate in the shadows, and they sure as hell don't want a journalist tagging along with them. So the Iraqis have occasionally invited journalists to go see things that they're up to. The picture up here is an American-made F-16 fighter jet that the Iraqis bought from the United States and criticized the United States every single minute up until that they couldn't get it fast enough. But they invited, when they got them finally to Iraq, they invited journalists to come and take a look at them, and they let them on their base. The Kurds the Kurds who are not part of formally of the government of Iraq, you may have heard Kurdistan in the north, they have actually invited journalists to observe operations, which has been kind of amazing. There's been some video and reporting out there of a mission they had in the north against ISIS. And again, cameras covered the whole thing live. So how do you go cover war then? One thing you could do is you can go to a neighboring country. Lots of reporters are flocking to places like Turkey, Kuwait, UAE, Jordan, and Saudi. It's still difficult to cover war in a lot of those countries, and dealing with many of the governments of some of those countries I listed, those non-democratic governments that I listed, can also be very difficult and can get you kicked out. There are some American military bases in the region that myself and colleagues have gone to over the years in Qatar and United Arab Emirates that they will. They're local bases, but they're widely populated by the U.S. military, and they'll let you come there, and they usually will let you do interviews, and the people, once I've always found there as opposed to in the halls of the Pentagon, are a lot more open and transparent about what they're doing. Also, one thing a lot of journalists do is go embed with the Navy. The Navy is actually the most proactive and media-friendly of all the military services. And part of it's because they have their ships, and their ships aren't really they're in international waters, and they're essentially an extension of the United States. So that's on the deck of the aircraft carrier Harry Truman in Dubai when it was in a port visit there. They'll take reporters out and usually let them video or write and do interviews. Another way, which I've done a number of times, is go with a senior official. As mentioned, I travel a lot with the Defense Secretary. And when you go with them, they're usually in and out in a matter of hours. And you have protection, and you can usually get some access to the troops while you're there, because somebody like the Defense Secretary, when he goes to Afghanistan, is going to meet with troops, and he's going to talk to them and take questions from them. As I mentioned in a class earlier today, I kind of always thought that the questions that the soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines would ask would kind of all be planted about, like, how great's the U.S. military and stuff like that. But they're actually really good questions most of the time, like really important questions, and they're usually not even about what they're doing there in Iraq. A lot of times they're asking about broader policies that could impact their families and their benefits and their spousal care, their child care and stuff back home. And they're very attuned to the defense budget and the political fights that are going on in Washington and elsewhere. Also, when we go over with a senior official, a lot of times they'll talk to us while they're there. Right after we leave on the plane, they'll usually come back and tell us, what the meetings they had with the senior officials from whatever government they were in, or whatever country, that we were in. And even other times they'll, if we're not in, say, even actually, yes, they will, because in this trip, we were in Afghanistan here, and we went, and there was the Afghan defense minister did a press conference with the U.S. Defense Secretary in Kabul right after they had a meeting. So, say you can't go overseas and you're stuck back in Washington or wherever you are, and you want to cover war. I'm not the type of guy who will pack up and go to the battlefield. I'm at the point in my life where I don't want to do that anymore. I'm not going to go by myself and go try to cover it. But I have a lot of friends who have done that, and I know other people who are still doing that. So I spend a lot of my time going through government documents, looking for things that stand out. It's amazing, actually, how much information is out there and how much information the government discloses. But it takes a lot of times, months, sometimes years, to connect all the dots. One of the things I've stressed a lot in talking to students this week is sourcing and the importance of relationships and cultivating relationships with people. Many of the scoops I've gotten over the years have come directly from sourcing. A lot of the stuff that I deal with on a regular basis and many of my colleagues deal with on a regular basis is really sensitive. It can get people fired at best and sent to jail at worst. I built a vast network of sources over 10 years of doing this around the world, and not just in the military, in other countries' militaries and governments, and at the State Department and embassies and retirees. And it's really been key for me. It's incredibly key for me that when something happens involving the military, that I know somebody I can call immediately to give me kind of perspective on what's happened, to kind of get the ball rolling on developing my story. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, a lot of the stuff going on is being done by special operations, not just in Afghanistan and Iraq, but around the world. We're seeing this in Africa right now a lot, and in Libya, which is the next area that you're going to be hearing a lot about, mark my word, in the coming weeks, if not sooner. Since the military is not deploying like it used to, and it really has no interest in deploying large-scale forces like it did during Iraq and Afghanistan, where there were literally hundreds of thousands of soldiers who were deployed to a certain part of the world, they're inserting special teams to go after what they believe are terrorist networks in, like I said, primarily Africa and the Middle East. But it's concerning because the stories and the people they're impacting, both there and the stories even of these people who are doing these missions, should be told, in my opinion, and are not being told. So I don't want to be all gloom and doom. There are some positives, and this guy right here is actually one of them. His name's Colonel Steve Warren. He was the head of the Secretary of Defense's press office. He is a guy who understands the frustration that journalists have not being able to cover anything involving this conflict with ISIS. So he stuck his neck out. He's a colonel, he's not a general, so he stuck his neck out and made this known to the Secretary of Defense and other senior people at the Pentagon. And he was rewarded and sent to Baghdad for 6 months. And he is the spokesman right now for the operations that are going on against ISIS. He has done regular briefings. I mean, he's still a PR guy. He's still going to spin the story, but at least there's somebody who's there and somebody who's answering questions on a regular basis. He being there is also trying to plant the seed in the leadership of the military there that they should be regularly talking about what they're doing. So, commanders, like senior military people, generals, they and the people who work for them tend to take on the personalities of the senior general. The guy who's in charge of U.S. Central Command right now is this guy named Lloyd Austin. He does not talk to the media, ever. And because of that, the tens of thousands of soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines who are under him take his lead, and they also don't want to talk to the media. And even his deputies, it's request interviews. We advocate, the Press Association, me personally, other journalists personally, we constantly advocate to get people at the podium, in the Pentagon, or wherever they are, and just talking to journalists. But the guy at the top doesn't make it a priority to talk to journalists. We've found way too much that they'll just close up and not talk at all. A little concerning right now also is that the head of Special Operations Command has just been nominated to replace General Austin, who I believe is retiring. And as I said earlier, Special Operations is inherently secretive and doesn't want to talk about anything they do, so it'll be a real interesting transition to see if he continues that kind of attitude and mind frame moving forward when he actually takes over. One of the places I go when I want to try to get news about what's happening, say, against ISIS, is I go to arms shows overseas. They're kind of like the Wild West. They look all flashy like this right here. That's in Abu Dhabi. It's a show called IDEX, trade show in the US. I always say in the United States they have trade shows, and overseas they have arms bazaars. This is an arms bazaar, modern day arms bazaar. You never know who's going to show up at these things. So this last one I was just at earlier, that was about a year ago. But guys like this show up. So you have over here, you have a Chinese army general who is one of the top guys in the very, very secretive Chinese military. And he shows up and he'll go and him and his people will go around and they'll take pictures of especially every single American and European type made weapon that's being displayed. They usually won't talk to you. If they do, they'll kind of mutter some stuff, basically telling you to go away. But you can follow them around and take pictures of them, and it's interesting to see what they're interested in, what they actually stop and pick up and look at. Then you have the Russians. Russians are there. The Russians actually came with a whole load of tanks and all sorts of Kalashnikov guns and plenty of displays, and they're actually very willing to chat about things that they're doing. I actually was in a really surreal briefing where they were touting the surface-to-air missile system that shot down that Malaysian plane. They claimed that they weren't using, of course, but they actually gave a full briefing on how it's basically the greatest missile system in the world. You can't make this stuff up. And then you got guys like this guy on the right, who I don't have a picture of his leopard skin slippers, which were, I'm pretty sure, real leopard skin slippers. And he is Abdul Rahim Mohammed Hussein. He is Sudan's defense minister. And oh, by the way, he's wanted by The Hague for crimes against humanity in Darfur. I was there, and I didn't know who he was. I was at this conference in a room a little bit bigger than this, and it was all sorts of defense leaders. It was a private conference on the day before that big exposition. There was an American moderating a panel that he was at. He didn't speak, but one of his generals spoke. And somehow they just were like, hey, do you want to do an interview with this guy? And I was like, why not? I don't know who he is. I'm trying to Google on my phone who he is, and I'm getting whisked down a hallway by a whole bunch of his handlers, and down more hallways, and I'm starting to think to myself, this is probably not the best of ideas. I show up at a room with a hotel room door, passport, okay, here's my passport. They start writing down all my passport information, and now I'm going, okay, what have I got myself into? Stand straight, stick your arms out, pat down everywhere. Okay, come on inside. I walk inside. There are men praying on prayer rugs everywhere in the room, and I'm beginning to think, what did I get myself into? So then they tell me that this gentleman doesn't want to speak to me, but his general who gave his speech will speak to me. I said, no. I said, I saw what the general had to say in his speech, and his PowerPoint, by the way, looked like something out of 1985. It was really, really, really old because they just don't have the technology and computers and stuff that we have. And finally I convinced them, so he came in, and for 20 minutes we talked about how he was working to prevent ISIS from spilling into from Libya into Sudan, and kind of the border security issues that Sudan is facing. And no mention of war crimes or whether he did it or not. But again, just absolutely incredible. One of the other things, people who showed up was Petro Poroshenko, who is the president of Ukraine. He showed up because he was angry at the United States for not providing it with any type. They've been asking for military aid to fight Russia, and the United States has given them limited aid. They've given them a lot of defensive-related stuff. They've given them uniforms and basic stuff that they just need. And so he wanted to basically show up and look around and see what was available for him. I was lucky enough he had an impromptu press conference to get a question. I was the only American journalist to get a question to him. He took three questions, and I asked him what his message was for President Obama, and he came back with a pretty straightforward, pointed answer, and we had national news right away. We had international news, I should say, right away. So these shows, let's see if this works. To give you an idea also about how big these places are, they're absolutely huge. And I apologize, it's my first time ever using the time-lapse feature. They're just massive. I had my Fitbit on, and I logged on average of 9 miles a day just walking around. So luckily I was staying at a hotel with a really nice pool at the end of the day to go relax in. We're about halfway. And this is all fake, by the way. Everything here is built purposely for this. There's so much money being poured into this. Anyway, we're getting close to the end. There we go.
Did they always have the sales there?
Do they always have this? They've been doing this show, I think, for about 10 years. UAE is kind of the one, United Arab Emirates is kind of the one safe haven, like secure area in the region. And this is a huge business, like the conference business over there is just amazingly huge.
How many countries were present?
I'd lie if I made up a number, but I'd say probably 6, maybe more. I mean, I talked to a lot of people like the Estonians and Serbians and people you just don't have access to over here. So kind of my get off, oops, sorry. There we go. All right, so pretty much that's it. I wanted to just give you one piece of advice. Never stop digging. Keep asking questions. Keep asking questions. Keep asking questions. Ask hard ones and even ask some softballs from time to time because you never know what they're going to actually turn up. So anyway, I'm really excited to hear what's on your minds. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute privilege and honor to be here.
Conference, national defense, national press asking really tough questions to military officials?
I'll tell you, the first time I ever was in a press conference was 10 years ago, basically almost, I mean, it's literally 10 years in a couple of weeks. And it was when Donald Rumsfeld was still the defense secretary, and they brought me in, and the guy I was with had to escort me in because I didn't have access to the Pentagon yet. And he gave me a question to ask. I can't tell you what it was, but he gave me a question to ask. And I can tell you, I had my hand up the entire time, and my heart felt like it was coming through my shirt the first time. I was incredibly nervous. Everything's on TV now. You don't want to turn into a YouTube clip, which is like the big fear. You never want to turn into a YouTube clip. So I've gotten, you know, at the beginning, I'll be honest, I was scared a lot. I didn't want to look like an idiot to my colleagues who were in the room, my much more experienced colleagues. And I'll say this, the Pentagon beat is, the group of journalists covering the Pentagon are just amazingly talented, and it is by far the most collegial press corps in Washington. Everybody is after the exact same goal. Everybody just wants information. They want to get the truth. And we will work together if we need to. Well, for instance, I was telling Lisa at lunch, we had a press conference where they were really quickly, they had press secretary, the secretary's up there, Secretary of Defense is at the podium, and the press secretary's calling on people like rapid fire where you couldn't get a follow-up at all. So we see this happening, and we're like, okay, I'd like to yield my time back to this other person because they had a great follow-up, and I'll let them have my question. So, you know, we work together a lot. It's, you know, it's dealing with people. There are a lot of people in the military who do believe that they should be telling the story about what they're doing because they believe it's positive, that it's in their interest to tell what they're doing. And there's a lot of them who will totally tackle a tough question and go out there and talk about uncomfortable things because they know that the repercussions if they don't talk about it. And there's others who just believe that they just aren't going to deal with it. And sometimes they'll just go through the motions and go to the podium and stand there for 30 minutes and not say a word. So, personality driven, I guess, depending on who you're asking. But it's, you I always keep with me that, again, this is such an important subject and it impacts so many people's lives. And it's a lot of times it's easy to forget that when, you're in the comforts of Washington, D.C. Yep.
How often do you have somebody or a story comes out that somebody, a military official, wants to tell but they can't tell, and you're the one who can do it? Does that happen ever?
What do you mean I'm the one who can't do it?
So, military-wise, like, they can only put out certain stuff because they have their own agendas.
Right, they put out the talking
Civilian
points.
journalists, you can tell the full story.
Mhm.
Have you had a situation where somebody came to you or a little bird?
Oh, sure. Oh, all the time. That's basically the way I operate.
Can you share?
Sure. One thing that just popped into my head randomly was there was a secret intelligence program to build a bunch of new intelligence planes that were going to be deployed to, I think, Iraq at the time. This was a few years back. Somebody just sent me the briefing on what this project was, and they said, "Hey, do you know about this?" Like, no, I didn't know about this. And it ended up, in my world that I was in at the time, it was a really big deal. There was a lot of money being spent on it. It was being fast-tracked. It was being done completely in secret to not draw attention to it. And we put it out there. But, regularly, every day, I'm talking to people every single day. And let me tell you guys that. One of the biggest things that I see young journalists doing now is they use email for everything. You're not going to get a major scoop from somebody on email because, as we've seen time and time again, email is traceable, hackable, everything else. So no one is going to tell you anything of substance on email. And my favorite thing is always when an editor, and I've done this to reporters before too, be like, "Hey, did you follow up on X?" And they'll be like, "Oh, I sent him an email." Well, did you pick up the phone and call him? It's the sourcing, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is to me that is the holy grail of covering the military and defense everywhere, and it's integral every single day. As I said, I want to be able to, when anything happens, I want to have somebody I could think of immediately and say, that person, I'll call them and pick up the phone, and they'll be able to explain what's going on and then tell me somebody else I could probably talk to. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
With that said, what you were just saying about having sources to be able to contact, have you found a culture shift between, say, Rumsfeld, Hagel, and now Carter, that those sources, either military or Department of Defense civilians, are willing to offer information?
So Gates was infamous for making everyone sign non-disclosure agreements, especially in my world. It was big with the budget. We always would try to get budget information ahead of time, find out, because that would unveil strategic planning and shifts in the landscape of the military. But he was doing this with everything. Gates also had a really tight circle around him. So Rummy, I really came in right at the end of his tenure. I actually just ran into him at a cocktail party about 2 weeks ago. He created an app for your phone about a game of solitaire that Winston Churchill, I believe, taught him. Really strange. I can't make that up either. Panetta was a politician. He understood the political value of leaking information and not going after, I should say, the people who did. Gates went after the people who did. He fired the people who leaked stuff. He would go on witch hunts to find the people who leaked information. Panetta and Hagel it was easier, that people were more, they were less guarded, let's say, because a lot of the same people are still there now. They're much more guarded now. The Secretary of Defense right now came in with not much time left. He has a very ambitious agenda, and it's basically he wants to accomplish that and make a name for himself and say he was able to. And I've talked to him. He wants to really make a change. He believes he can make a big change. Unfortunately, the press hasn't been a major player in the stuff that he's been doing. Takes reporters on trips with him. He's on a trip right now. It's very difficult. I have to be honest, I have not traveled with Carter. I've actually declined a number of trips. My boss went on one recently. It's very tough to get access to him. A lot of people think we're on the plane with these guys. We're seeing them all the time. Leon Panetta used to come in the back. Chuck Hagel would come in the back actually a lot. And he was very, very good, Chuck Hagel, when he was not on camera. He clammed up a lot and kind of turned into Senator Hagel with lots of tangents and rambling when the cameras were on. So basically, to kind of just directly answer it, it's a little bit tougher now than it was under the last two, but probably still better than the one before that.
Having seen the Foley's speak a few times, they're very angry, I think, toward the government and the lack of cooperation I think they felt they were getting trying to get James released. What's your sense in terms of how hard the government works to get journalists released that are caught?
So I don't have very good insight into that. I will tell you that I've been surprised. I'll be honest, I was surprised at the level that they went to get Bo Bergdahl back. And if that's an indication, I want to believe that they're actually doing stuff. I will tell you that the man who owns my publication and is the chairman of Atlantic Media is David Bradley, and he does a lot of work in this area himself. And we did not know about this. And one day, a very, very long New Yorker article came out about the work he'd been doing. Kind of it's kind of, I guess, the negotiation work that he can do that the government can't do. So I'm just not informed enough, I guess, to know exactly what's going on everything. Yep.
As a journalist who's in the military, I know that I constantly get emails and stuff about what things we now can't release that we used to be able to release, and more and more restrictions about how I can report from within the military itself. Do you find that throughout the years, even just kind of with the rise of ISIS and the news with ISIS, do you find the military is being less transparent with the information we're releasing to civilian journalists?
100% yes. In the meeting I had with this Army general last week, that was actually one of the big things. Like the military used to, when I got there, and and I hear stories from others who talk about the 90s and the 80s and the 70s even. Some who have worked back that far who are still on the beat, and they used to be very, very, very transparent with just basic information, like what units are deployed. Like, could we get a list of the units that are deployed? But there seems to just be a sense that everything is operational security. The latest thing that we're getting is they won't tell us the names of people we're interviewing. Like you could say, Captain Marcus or, Specialist Jane, but they won't give us their last names for fear that then they'll end up on an ISIS kill list and something could happen to them and their families. As a human, I sympathize with that, and I don't want something I write about somebody to, get killed. But it's also people who are a lot of times not even involved and are, tertiary to everything. So stuff like we asked the Army. We said, why can't we have lists of the units deployed? And he said, oh, we have that. And he brought it out, and it's stamped. It's stamped with a classification that's not classified, by the way. It's called for official use only. The Bush administration, I believe, is the one who initiated that. And basically, they've stamped everything now for official use only. It's not classified. If it was classified, it'd be secret, top secret, other levels above that. But they've made everything like that. So they want us to have to work to get any piece of information. So they basically want us to submit freedom of information requests for everything. And then so you'll do that, and then they'll say, you're in the backlog. There are 17,352, no joke, people ahead of you. Maybe 6 years later you'll get something in the mail saying why they're not releasing it to you.
A follow-up to that question. Do you think the reason the military is slowly becoming more and more kind of not transparent with our information, do you think it's due to the increase in like the internet and the use of the internet and the use of social media? Do you think it's because of that?
That could be part of it. I just think there are, again, it comes down from the top. I think since Gates made a big push not to get information out there, and a lot of the people who were there, like the current Defense Secretary Carter, he was there. He was the head of acquisition in the Pentagon. He was an undersecretary when Gates stayed on after President Obama was elected. And you know, that culture has kind of resonated with people, and it's unfortunately become the norm. So, yep.
You mentioned the importance of cultivating relationships, and I'm wondering if that ever becomes a bit of a conflict, because in terms of whether something you might publish would alienate some of those relationships you've been cultivating. I'm wondering what comments you might have about that situation.
So, yeah, that could totally happen. I'm trying to think of a case where it might have happened. I mean, sure, I've written stuff that's pissed people off. The way I look at it is I'm playing the long game. I'm not going anywhere on this beat. If someone like could make a compelling argument to me that something they told me before I published it will be detrimental to something, and it's not like a huge deal. It's it could be something smaller. I will consider not doing that, but it so rarely comes up. That a lot of the sources I have, they know what my job is. They understand what my role is, and they know what they tell me I'm going to likely use. I mean, the other thing is, for a lot of you, a lot of the anonymous sources are not the norm in journalism. And when you first start practicing journalism, when you get out of school and stuff, you will not be allowed to use you rightfully will not be allowed to use anonymous sources. It takes a lot for us now to use an anonymous source. It's not like we're going to get a phone call from somebody telling us something and we're going to go direct to print. These are people we know, people we've vetted, and have built relationships with over the years. So when you see an anonymous source quoted, it's somebody who is hopefully very much in the know and has very solid information.
Time for one more question, I think.
Does Defense One practice social media verification when we're talking about ISIS propaganda?
So like, do we just like put something up? Oh, we will not. I mean, I might personally retweet something that I see, but I make it very clear on my Twitter bio that it's not an endorsement or anything like that. We will not write a story based off of something on social media. Now, if somebody in authority addresses something in social media, we might write something that says, this person said X about it, and then point out that there was a tweet out there by whatever. But I can't even think of an incident where that's actually happened with us personally. So, time for one more quick one.
Marcus, in 10 to 15 years, where do you see yourself in this ever-growing career in journalism?
That's a great question. So I guess, like I said, I really love what I'm doing right now. I got to be careful and say that because it's on camera, right? So if my boss watches this. I love that I'm working for a company that's investing in journalism and is not just, again, making us throw stuff on the web just to get clicks. At the same time, I always aspire for more than I have right now. Probably for me, the next move would be to a national publication, or possibly going the TV route. I do a lot of the TV stuff, talking head-like stuff now for the cable networks and such. So it's something I enjoy. I like doing it. It's kind of turned into a game. It kind of puts me on the other side of the seat also, and get to be the one being asked the questions. I enjoy it. So.
Thank you
Well, thank you so much, guys. Really.